Hello, welcome to episode 13. Aren't we getting along nicely? And this week we're discussing Neptune. It's quite an interesting planet. I suppose, being a Pisces, I ought to love Neptune. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with Neptune. But as I mentioned last week, I have a much better relationship with Uranus. But there we go. Now, Neptune Neptune is part of our solar system, and like Uranus, is one of the more outer planets, so it's further away from Earth. You cannot see it without a telescope, unless you've got binocular vision or the opposite, telescopic vision. And it was Galileo who first saw it when he was observing the Jupiter system on the 28th of December in 1612. But he wasn't too sure what it was. He sort of nearly discovered it. He sort of did some mathematical calculations and worked it out. I don't think he actually saw it with the naked eye. And it was recorded several more times without being recognised as a planet, and over the following years from 1612. And it wasn't until a chappie called Lalande, a French astronomer, recorded Neptune on the 8th and 10th of May in 1795 without recognising that it was not a star. So obviously he thought it was a star. And now, last week we talked about William Herschel. Well, he had a little kiddie called John. And John was also involved in the discovery of Neptune and recorded it on the 14th of July in 1830, also believing it to be a star. So we've got three people now who have observed it and have gone, oh, I think it's a star. But it was a chappie called Urbain Le Verrier who worked at the Paris Observatory and deduced by mathematical calculation that the existence of Neptune. And the quote is, he discovered a star with the tip of his pen without any instruments other than the strength of his calculations alone. And so it was a pretty big thing to discover another planet. So, William Herschel had discovered Uranus and whatever the heck it was, and now Urbain Le Verrier has discovered it, doing it mathematically, because what he was calculating was that Uranus had an erratic orbit. Well, why was it orbiting erratically? Because Neptune was affecting its orbit. Yeah? And so he eventually, I don't know how they came over there. There was a lot of argument over who had found it, because there were two other astronomers, George Airy and John Couch Adams, who independently were working on finding the planet, and there was much nationalistic rivalry between the French and the British over who had priority and deserved the credit for its discovery, and eventually, after much argument, it was called Neptune. So it's the second of the outer planets, and it represents the truth that everything we know, everything we perceive to be real, is nothing more than an illusion. Oh my goodness me, why would we want to have a planet that represents illusion? Now, because it's a recent discovery, 1800s, as opposed to the Babylonians, which is 2,000 years ago, and the other ones were chatted about. Because it's a recent discovery, obviously with, telescopes only recently having been invented, it took a while for astrologers, this is not astronomers now, this is astrologers, to sort of work out what Neptune was all about. And they've come to the conclusion now that Neptune is about things, yes, that can't be observed. It's our intuition, it's our psychic self. It's something that we have to resort to trust rather than facts and reality. So if you want to get into weird and wonderful stuff, then you need to get into Neptune, because Neptune has two sides to it. One is illusion and the other is delusion. So if you've got too much Neptune going on in your chart, you might be deluded, and if you've got a nice placement of it, you might be you might be quite inspired and inspirational. So it's a really difficult planet to explain in one sentence flat. You have to imagine, sometimes astrologers describe Neptune as being like the fog. Yeah. So if you think of Neptune as a bit sort of a foggy planet, there's no clarity involved with it. If we're going to use a planet that would define clarity, I'd say the sun actually is the clearest of all the planets. but Neptune's not. So it's a generational one, so everybody in your year at school will have it in the same sign unless it was changing sign during the year that you were born. So most of the people born in the 60s will have Neptune in the sign of Scorpio. Is that right? We're looking at a chart here. Somebody born in 1967, Neptunes, yes. And we're going to be using two people's charts today, one of which is a lovely client of mine called Rachel, and the other is Bjork, the female musician. And she's a triple bloody Scorpio, poor woman. She's got a Scorpio ascendant, she's got Sun in Scorpio, Moon in Scorpio, and she also has Neptune in Scorpio. Now, we couldn't accuse Bjork of being normal. You know, that's not a word you could use to describe her. I'm not saying she's abnormal, but she's certainly not run of the mill or regular in any way. And also she's very determined in what she does. She's got Sun in the first house. I think her Moon's in the 12th. Hold on, let me have a look at her chart just a second. I've got it here. She's got Moon in the 12th, Sun in the first, and her Sun is conjunct Neptune. So if you were born in the mid-60s and you are a Scorpio, you will have your Sun and your Scorpio, you'll have your Sun and your Neptune very close together. And I know quite a number of people born in the 60s that are Scorpios that got a Sun conjunct Neptune, one of which is another author from my publishers, and he wrote a brilliant book about Amma, the hugging saint. He's a Scorpio Sun conjunct Neptune, and you know, he really is not normal. There's no way you describe the lovely man as normal. I'm not saying he's abnormal, but he's not normal. He's not run of the mill. He's not regular. And I think part of his life story about Neptune, he's been sort of searching for himself, and he used Amma, the hugging saint, went out to India, discovered her, blah blah blah, used her as a sort of a focus for him to understand his own innate abilities. So wherever Neptune is in your chart, and the sign that it's in and the location of it gives us an idea of your psychic abilities, because it's, you know, you cannot be psychic to order, unlike breathing, which you can sort of reasonably control by holding your breath or breathing deeply. You can't really control how the Neptune is in your chart. And I know plenty of psychic I know so many people that are psychic, but I don't think your average person can be psychic to order. It's once they allow and trust, then their psychic self comes through. Yeah, so find where your Neptune is, where it's located, and that will be in your chart where you're likely to have your psychic ability. Now in my case, I've got Neptune in Scorpio. Everybody born in the 60s. I was born in 1960, and my Neptune's located, and we'll come to houses later, my Neptune's located in the third house. And the third house in astrology is all about communication. Well, hey, what do I do for a living? I'm a writer, I'm an author, I'm a communicator. I'm here yakking to you on on my podcast on Libsyn, and so my psychic ability, if we're going to call it that, is about communication. So one thing I do know that's a definite, no matter who I'm communicating with, I will know how to communicate with them in the best way. So don't ask me to rationalise it, I wouldn't know, but whoever it is I'm talking to, I will always be able to talk at their level so that they will feel understood. Now, Bjork, in her lovely chart, I don't know if you pronounce it Bjork or Bjork, let's say she's Bjork. Her Neptune is very near to her ascendant, and so she says in her biog that her mother was a hippie and she was brought up with astrology and lighting candles and burning incense and doing hippie things, and that would be quite very much in keeping with her chart, because, you know, sort of being a true hippie is like, okay, yeah, you know, we're going to connect with our higher selves. Well, that's actually what Neptune's all about, connecting to your higher self. Unlike Jupiter, which is about faith, belief, further education, long distance travel and knowledge, Neptune is about trusting the divine. And I think we can be in agreement that Bjork has definitely got that. Now, our other chart example is this lovely lady here, Rachel, who actually is an Aquarius. And we know that Aquarians aren't normal. They are very different, unusual, and That's another way to describe an Aquarius. Freedom loving. And her ascendant, so in Rachel's case, her ascendant is also Scorpio, and her Neptune is on her ascendant. So if you were born in the 60s and you've got a Scorpio ascendant, no matter what sign of the zodiac you are, if you've got a Scorpio ascendant, you are going to have Neptune very near to your ascendant, either near ascendant or in your 12th house, depending on what time of day you were born. And you most definitely will need to trust your intuition and trust your higher self and trust your inner wise self. You must trust. Neptune doesn't work if you challenge it. Give me the evidence. That's going to turn Neptune right off. So 60s babes, Neptune is our signature in Scorpio. It's happy in Scorpio, Neptune actually. Neptune's very happy in Scorpio because Scorpio is the sign of deep depth things, and Neptune in the sign of Scorpio is about getting to the truth of depth of ability to be psychic. And in Rachel's chart, so even though she's a sort of freedom-loving, wacky Aquarian, she does have her Neptune so near to her ascendant. I'm talking to you directly now, I beg your pardon, Rachel. You do need to definitely trust your intuition on lots of different things. And I think Bjork would also come under that banner too. You should need to trust your intuition. Now, at the moment, as we speak, Neptune's in the sign of Pisces. So my generation are having a fab time, mostly. Because we've forming a nice aspect between where Neptune was when we were born and where it is today. So it's both in water signs. So my generation especially so is sort of searching for the divine and learning about meditation, connecting with the higher self, and wanting to be involved in angel therapy and psychic ability. And the whole psychic thing was pretty much fashionable in the 60s, and I think it's turning that way again, and will continue to for quite a number of years yet, because Neptune's going to be in Pisces. I think it's at least another 8 years, if I remember rightly, something like that. It's quite a while. So 60s babes, we're having a fantastic time. Touch into that higher intuitive self, intuitive part of yourself, and look to see in your chart where your Neptune's located. So what area of life would you need to use your intuition? So in my case, it's about communication. It's so funny. I was reading for a gentleman once, and I was reading for him in the offices in town, and I was sort of halfway through the reading, and he'd got awfully long fingers. He had beautiful hands, and in palmistry they're called philosopher's hands. Really long fingers, terribly elegant hands he had. And I just made sort of a rather flippant comment, something like, oh God, the worst job that you could do would be to drive a van. That's what he did for a living. He drove. He worked for the post office, and he drove the delivery vans. And I said, you've got a philosopher's hands, and you should be sort of sat in the library somewhere reading books out to people on, or sort of studying philosophy. And I said, the worst thing you could do possibly would be to drive a van. And he sort of looked at me and went, that's what I do for a living. And I said, oh gosh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to be insulting, but it's probably not really in keeping with the style of hand that you have. And anyway, I came across him. I think I did another reading for him, ages later, something mad, like 15 years later, and he was still working for the post office, and he was still really not happy in that job because it was just too organised for him. He would have felt much better sitting there and talking about life, the universe and everything, and sort of higher stuff. But anyway, so yeah, if you've got wherever Neptune is in your chart, this is, in my case, it's in the 3rd house, so I intuitively just happen to, whilst communicating with them, point out that and in fact it does happen with clients, I'll just sort of, it's always, I always make a sort of little chance remark about something. It's just a little drop away comment, and it'll be really quite important to the person that I've said it, and I'll say something like blah 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 blah, and then they'll go, do you know, Mary, you said da 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 da, oh, it came true, or it's really, that's just correct. And I thought, oh crikey, where did that come from? Because it's not from my conscious self, it's from a deeper part of me. So find your Neptune in your chart, look at to see where you can intuit things. Maybe it's in the section of your chart to do a career. So maybe you should be using your intuition in your career. I did a reading once for a chap, he sign the zodiac it was, but he had Neptune in his 4th house, and I sort of flippantly said something, oh gosh, you should really be living on a river because Neptune's the planet that governs water. And he went, gosh, how did you know that? And I said, well, I don't know that. What do you mean? And he said, well, I live on a canal boat on a river. And I went, well, there you go. You're living your chart. Love it when people live their charts. It's great. And so it stays in sign for a long amount of time, something mad like 10, 15 years. So as I say, everybody in your year at school will have it in the same sign. So you'll have the same attitude towards the how can I put it, the ability to be psychic and trusting intuition stuff. So say if you were born with your Neptune, let's go back in time a bit now, say you had your Neptune, I might need to go forwards actually, say you got your Neptune in Capricorn, there's a big generation of indigos born with that. You're going to be very practical about your intuition. I mean, I'll talk about indigos in another podcast. But the sign that your Neptune in is what sort of attitude you will have towards the whole psychic thing. And then just quickly before we close, what is psychic? Everybody has the ability. Okay, it's got nothing to do with your rational brain. It's got nothing to do with your heart center. Your intuitive self is the part of you that you cannot control, that is the collective part of what makes us all humans, or in fact even non-humans, angels and things. That it's what connects rather than what disconnects or doesn't connect. So we're all connected together. So sometimes you can tap into the great unconscious, and I think it was Freud's mate Jung who talked about the collective conscious or unconscious. Well, we can all tap into that, which we do when we're asleep. Everybody that's asleep taps into the collective consciousness thingy jobby what's it. So we can all operate with our Neptunes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, too much Neptune going in your chart, you'll become an alcoholic, you'll lose the plot, you'll be taking drugs all the time. I think Bjork went through a period of doing that. So be careful if there's too much Neptune in your chart. You will need to rein it in and check where your Saturn is to balance it out, because Saturn's about reality and the real things in life, and Neptune's about the things that aren't real. So you need to work. So if you've got too much Neptune going in your chart, then concentrate on your Saturn. So that was a little discussion on Neptune. Oh, and just before we go, the symbol for it looks like a half circle facing upwards with a little stick coming below it. So it's quite an easy one to recognise. Don't confuse it with Mercury, which looks similar but not the same. So it's a half circle with a little stick coming down through it and a cross. So you could sort of say it looks like an inverted umbrella. Do you know when your umbrella blows inside out? That's what Neptune, the symbol, looks like. Which is similar to, but not the same as, Mercury. So please don't get the two confused. Check them out. They're not the same. Similar, but not the same. But Neptune is the blown inside out umbrella. Anyway, have a fab week. We'll be speaking about Pluto next week, and I am going to allow 20 minutes for next week's podcast, because there's a lot that needs to be discussed on Pluto. It's a very interesting planet. So have a fab week. Speak to you soon. And just as a final point, if you would like to learn astrology, do get in contact. I teach astrology. It's a 6-week course, and it's an introduction to astrology. At the end of it, you will know so much more about astrology than you do now. And I have actually written a Kindle book called 6 Easy Steps in Astrology. So everything that you're learning on these podcasts are in there. So if you like teaching yourself, go to Kindle and download 6 Easy Steps in Astrology by myself, not by anybody else. and you can follow along with the podcast, because the information that I'm giving the podcast is the same as the information that's in the Kindle book, 6 Easy Steps. Have a fab week. Bye bye now.